Chapter 7. The abandoned Coleridge yard loomed against the midnight sky like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast, its decaying industrial bones silhouetted by a waxing moon. Isabella killed her sedan's headlights a block away, not wanting the beams to announce her arrival. She sat for a moment, engine idling, her rational mind screaming that this was a mistake. The car's leather upholstery creaked as she shifted in her seat. Outside, the summer night carried the smell of vegetation and stagnant pools of water. The dashboard clock glowed 11:52 p.m., its green digits casting an eerie glow across the front seat. Isabella tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The weight of exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. Her eyes burned from reviewing case files until the words blurred together, searching for patterns in the ritualistic killings that had Atlanta on edge. Wind rustled through the overgrown lot, carrying the musty scent of neglect and rain-soaked concrete. The hulking brick buildings, once a thriving train repair facility, now stood as canvas for Atlanta's graffiti artists and shelter for those with nowhere else to go. Even from her parked position, she could make out splashes of neon color against the weathered brick, ghostly in the moonlight. Isabella checked her phone. It was 11:52 p.m. The text message still glowed accusingly on her screen, its light harsh in the darkness of her car. "I know what Volkov is. Meet me at Coleridge Yard at midnight tomorrow. Come alone, or I won't show." She drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Mia, your curiosity will get you killed someday." The thought of her mother, whose own murder remained unsolved 20 years later, sent a familiar ache through Isabella's chest. "This is how people die in horror movies," she muttered, turning off the engine. Her voice sounded unnaturally loud in the confined space of her car. The sudden silence enveloped her, broken only by distant traffic, and the occasional train whistle, mournful and lonesome in the night. The city never truly slept. Here, in this forgotten corner, the darkness seemed deeper, more absolute. The weight of her service weapon pressed against her hip as she checked it, verifying the magazine was full before returning it to her holster. Metal slid against metal with a satisfying precision that steadied her nerves. As a district attorney, she wasn't required to carry a gun, but after receiving death threats during her third major case, she'd gotten a concealed weapons permit and begun training regularly. She hadn't told anyone about this meeting. Not Damon, not Harper, no one who might talk her out of this blatant stupidity. The details about Mikhail Volkov wouldn't leave her mind. The sketch that matched his aristocratic features. The peculiar details of the murders that defied explanation. Something in her gut told her this wasn't just another case. And Isabella had learned to trust that instinct. Isabella stepped out of the car, the door closing with a soft thunk that seemed too loud in the midnight stillness. The air hit her face, heavy humidity, carrying the complex scent of urban decay, rusting metal, stagnant water, and the sweet-sour smell of uncollected garbage from somewhere nearby. She straightened her shoulders, adopting the posture that had intimidated countless defendants in the courtroom. Chin up, back straight, eyes alert. Gravel crunched beneath her boots. Practical, chosen for potential pursuit rather than style. She tasted copper on her tongue, realizing she'd been biting the inside of her cheek. Overhead clouds drifted across the moon, momentarily dimming the yard before revealing it again in stark contrast of light and shadow. The rusty chain-link fence surrounding the property had been cut in multiple places, creating unofficial entrances for the urban explorers and homeless who claimed the space after dark. Metal edges, sharp where wire cutters had done their work, caught the moonlight like teeth. Isabella slipped through one such gap, her boots crunching softly on broken glass. She paused to listen, cataloguing sounds with the precision that had made her one of Atlanta's most methodical prosecutors. The night was alive with subtle symphonies, water dripping somewhere in rhythmic percussion, and leaves rustling in the intermittent breeze. Beneath it all was the distant hum of the city, Atlanta's perpetual exhalation of traffic and life. She moved with deliberate steps, one hand resting on her weapon, the other holding a small penlight illuminated just enough to avoid tripping. Every sense strained against the darkness. The farther she ventured into the complex, the more she felt eyes tracking her movements. A sensation she'd learned to trust during her years as a civil servant. The complex was a maze of industrial buildings in various states of decay. Some stood relatively intact, their boarded windows like blind eyes. Others had partially collapsed, spilling brick and timber across overgrown pathways. Moonlight sliced through gaps in roofs, creating silver pools amid shadow. The smell changed as she moved deeper into the complex. Damp earth, mildew. And underneath it all, the lingering ghosts of oil and machinery that had once filled these spaces. Isabella paused, listening to water dripping somewhere in the cavernous darkness. The soft skitter of what she hoped were rats, the distant wail of a siren across the city. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself through the breathing technique she'd learned to help get through the panic attacks after her mother's murder. 4 counts in, hold for 7, release for 8. The main warehouse rose before her, its rusted doors hanging partially open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. A faded sign, barely legible beneath layers of graffiti, marked the entrance. Isabella took a deep breath, catching the metallic tang of rust and the earthier scent of mildew before switching off her penlight and approaching the doorway. Moonlight spilled through broken skylights, creating pools of silver across the concrete floor inside. Enough to navigate by, enough to see anyone waiting. The temperature dropped noticeably as she neared the threshold. The accumulated days were unable to penetrate these thick walls. Her skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with fear. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you." The voice came from behind her, soft but clear in the night air. Isabella spun, drawing her weapon in a single fluid motion, aiming at the source. The leather holster made a whisper against her blouse as she drew, the weight of the gun familiar and reassuring in her hand. Her heartbeat accelerated, but her hands remained steady. Countless hours at the firing range had ingrained muscle memory that overrode adrenaline. A figure stood in the shadows between 2 smaller buildings, features indistinguishable. Tall, thin, hands raised slightly in surrender. The scent of fear, sharp, acrid sweat, carried on the night air. "You came alone? Good." The voice was male, with an accent that hinted at Eastern Europe. Vowels slightly elongated, consonants precise. "Put the gun away, Miss Santos. If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't have announced myself." Isabella didn't lower her weapon, her face settling into the impassive mask she wore in courtrooms when facing particularly volatile defendants. "How about you step into the light first?" she countered, keeping her aim steady. The first rule of negotiation: never relinquish leverage without getting something in return. a soft, bitter laugh. The light is precisely what I avoid these days. Nevertheless, the figure moved forward, the moonlight gradually revealing a gaunt man in his early 40s. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, as if he'd recently lost weight. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, still pink. A recent injury. His eyes darted nervously, scanning their surroundings with the hypervigilance Isabella had seen in witnesses under credible threat. As he approached, Isabella caught his scent. Unwashed body, the sharp tang of cheap vodka, and something medicinal, perhaps antiseptic on his wound. His breathing was shallow, quick, the sound of a man on edge. "Who are you?" "My name doesn't matter," he said, eyes darting nervously to the shadows surrounding them. The whites around his irises give him a look of perpetual surprise or terror. "What matters is what I know." "Which is what, exactly?" Isabella kept her tone professionally detached. "Mikhail Volkov." The man's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if the name itself might summon its owner. His hands trembled slightly, and he shoved them into his pockets to hide the weakness. The fabric of his jacket, once expensive, now stained and threadbare, rustled in the silence. "You've been investigating him." Isabella didn't lower her weapon, but her curiosity spiked. Despite the risks, the connection to Volkov validated her instinct to come tonight. Still, she maintained her poker face, one eyebrow arching slightly in practiced skepticism. "I'm neither confirming nor denying any investigation." "Don't bother with legal doublespeak." The man's fingers twitched nervously at his sides. A detail Isabella filed away, agitated, fearful, possibly substance withdrawal. His lips were chapped, cracking at the corners, signs of dehydration. "I worked for him. Security detail, inner circle. Until I saw something I shouldn't have." "And what was that?" Isabella shifted slightly, adjusting her stance for better balance while keeping her weapon trained on him. The man's eyes met hers, wide with a fear that seemed too genuine to fake. His pupils were dilated despite the darkness, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night. His voice carried the slightly metallic quality of genuine terror when he spoke. "What he is? What they all are?" "I need you to be more specific." Isabella used the precise, measured tone that had extracted confessions from the most reluctant witnesses. Patience was her specialty. The calm persistence that wore away resistance like water on stone. He glanced over his shoulder and moved closer, lowering his voice. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated, suggesting either injury or extreme stress. Gravel crunched beneath his feet. Worn leather shoes, once expensive, now scuffed and splitting at the seams. "They're not human." Isabella fought the urge to roll her eyes, but couldn't entirely suppress the slight downward turn of her mouth. Great. A midnight meeting with a conspiracy theorist. She'd sacrificed sleep and safety for this. "Sir, I don't have time." "The murders." He cut her off, the words spilling out faster now, his accent increasingly thickening. "The ones with the claw marks. The bodies were drained of blood. It's the signature of a particular wolf." Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air, her instincts suddenly on high alert. She hadn't released those details to the press. No one outside the investigation should know about the blood drainage. She lowered her weapon slightly, not holstering it, but no longer aiming directly at his center mass. The gun's weight pulled at her wrist as she adjusted her grip. "A signature?" she repeated, keeping her tone neutral. though her mind was racing through possibilities of how he knew the additional details of their murders. Inside source at the PD, morgue employee, or something more sinister. He wants Mikhail to know it was him. The man stepped closer, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, fingers flexing and unflexing at his sides like a pianist warming up before a difficult piece. The smell of fear intensified, his sweat carrying the sour note of adrenaline. Volkov runs the main wolf pack in Atlanta. He has enemies. Victor Aldrich is Volkov's uncle. Old blood. Old ways. He's killing humans who matter to Volkov to make a statement. Despite herself, Isabella felt a ripple of unease crawl up her spine. The man wasn't speaking like a typical conspiracy theorist. His fear was too specific, too detailed, lacking the grandiose certainty of delusional thinking she'd encountered in court-ordered psychiatric evaluations. Instead, he exhibited the fragmented, pressured speech patterns of someone who had witnessed trauma and was struggling to process it. What kind of statement? Isabella tilted her head slightly. A strand of hair fell across her cheek, but she resisted the urge to brush it away, unwilling to make any movement that might interrupt the information he was sharing. That humans are prey. The old code is weak. The man glanced up at the moon, now partially obscured by clouds. A reflexive gesture that seemed almost primal. His throat worked as he swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Volkov enforces boundaries. He protects humans mostly. Aldrich thinks that's a betrayal of their nature. Isabella studied him closely. His body language displayed genuine terror. The slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat despite the cool night, the constant scanning of surroundings. Either he was experiencing a psychotic episode, or he genuinely believed what he was saying. And if he believed it... You expect me to believe Mikhail Volkov is some kind of... What? Werewolf? She kept her voice low, steady, but couldn't entirely mask the skepticism. The word itself felt ridiculous on her tongue, childish, belonging to horror movies and teenage fiction. The man flinched at the word, his shoulders hunching, as if she'd physically struck him. The reaction sent droplets of sweat flying from his brow, catching the moonlight like tiny diamonds before disappearing. "Don't say it so loudly," he hissed, taking a quick step closer. His breath hit her face, sour with fear and alcohol, yet his eyes remained focused and coherent. "They can hear things you wouldn't believe." "Right." Isabella finally lowered her weapon, but didn't holster it. The metal had warmed in her hand, no longer cool against her palm. "Do you have any actual evidence of this? You think I'd come to a lawyer without evidence?" He sounded almost offended, straightening slightly. For a moment, Isabella glimpsed the man he might have been before. Competent, perhaps even impressive. "I'm not crazy. I know how this sounds." He reached slowly into his jacket, telegraphing the movement to avoid alarming her, and pulled out a folded manila envelope. The ordinary object looked incongruous in this setting, a fragment of office normalcy in the midnight ruins. The paper was creased and stained, one corner darkened with what might have been coffee or blood. Photos, documents, locations of safe houses, Aldrich's hunting grounds, and names. The names of humans who know and protect them in the city government. Isabella reached for the envelope, her mind already jumping ahead to how useless most of this would be in court. But as a lead, as a direction, she felt the familiar spark of intellectual challenge that had drawn her to law in the first place. The pleasure of piecing together a puzzle others couldn't solve. I had more, he said, still not releasing the envelope, his fingers clutching it like a lifeline. Paper crackled under his grip, his knuckles white with tension. Videos, blood samples. But they found where I was staying. I barely got out. Who are yous? Isabella asked, her voice softening slightly. Despite the fantastical nature of his claims, his terror was undeniably real. The instinct that had made her a successful prosecutor, the ability to read truth even in unlikely packages, was humming with certainty. I saw your photo in the paper. The woman leading the investigation into the ritualistic killings. His hand trembled slightly as he finally relinquished the envelope. The paper passed between them, warm from being pressed against his body. You have a reputation for not backing down, even when powerful people are involved. And you don't have connections to the families that control this city. Families? Isabella's brows drew together. A breeze whispered through the yard, carrying the distant sound of a freight train's mournful horn, a counterpoint to their tense exchange. Old Atlanta money. Old power. They've known about the wolves for generations. Protected them. And it's not just the wolves that are out there. He pressed the envelope into her hand, his fingers brushing against hers, cold, clammy with fear sweat. Some of the names in there will surprise you. Isabella took the envelope, weighing it in her hand. It was heavier than she'd expected, suggesting more than just a few pages. The texture was rough against her skin, the contents shifting slightly as she turned it over, looking for markings or identification. If your statement is true, why not go to the FBI or the media? His laugh was hollow, revealing teeth stained from too much coffee and too little care. The sound echoed briefly against the brick walls surrounding them. You think I haven't tried? The FBI agent I contacted disappeared the next day. As for the media, he gestured to his scarred face, the puckered tissue gleaming silver in the moonlight. Up close, Isabella could see the disturbing precision of the marks. 4 parallel lines, too precise to be accidental. This was their answer. Isabella frowned, her training in reading facial trauma, noting the precision of the cuts. Not random violence, but calculated marking. You're claiming Volkov did this to you? No. The man shook his head, a strand of greasy hair falling across his forehead. Volkov doesn't operate this way. It was Aldrich's people. They're trying to destabilize everything Volkov has built. The peace between packs, the agreements with the other soups, and the human authorities. And these murders? You're saying they're part of that destabilization? The first move in a war. He nodded, his gaze momentarily focusing with surprising clarity. For an instant, his eyes seemed almost fevered with the intensity of belief. Aldrich wants to expose what they are. Force a conflict that will let them live openly as predators, not in hiding. Isabella was slowly piecing it together. A power struggle within an organized criminal organization, with Volkov as the more moderate leader and Aldrich as the extremist challenger. She'd seen similar patterns in gang conflicts. The supernatural element was delusional, but the underlying pattern could be all. A vigilante group using wolf imagery, perhaps, or a cult with animalistic rituals. The wind picked up, sending a spiral of dead leaves dancing across the concrete between the buildings. A metal sheet loosened by the wind banged rhythmically against a wall somewhere in the distance, like an arrhythmic heartbeat. How do I contact you if I have questions? She asked, slipping the envelope into her jacket pocket. The weight of it pressed against her side, solid and real in contrast to the fantastical conversation. You don't. This is a one-time meeting. He stepped back, eyes continuing to scan the darkness with the restless vigilance of prey. His shoes scraped against the ground, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Be careful with those who claim to help you. The wolves have human allies everywhere: police, government, media. Trust no one who suddenly takes an interest in your investigation. The man suddenly froze, his entire body going rigid, as if electrified. His eyes widened, fixed on a point behind Isabella's shoulder. The color drained from his face, leaving his scar in stark relief against bloodless skin. The smell of his fear intensified, sharp and animal in its intensity. "Someone's here," he whispered, terror stripping his voice to a rasp. "Run!" Isabella spun, drawing her weapon again as she turned, falling automatically into the defensive stance that had become second nature. Her pulse quickened, but her breathing remained controlled. A pair of red eyes watched in the darkness between two crumbling walls. Not reflected light. These glowed with an internal fire, predatory and aware. As she stared, trying to process what she saw, her eyes were deliberately, concretely blinded. Light reflection. Motion sensor. Prank. Hallucination. Isabella's rational mind generated explanations with machine gun rapidity, each less convincing than the last. The sound of running footsteps pulled her attention back. Her informant was fleeing, sprinting with reckless speed through the debris-strewn ground, his earlier caution abandoned in pure panic. Each footfall sent gravel scattering, the sound diminishing as he raced away. A low growl emanated from the shadows where the eyes had been, a sound no human throat could produce. Something deep, primal, vibrated the air around her, resonating in her chest cavity like the bass at a concert. The sound seemed to bypass her ears entirely, registering directly in the most primitive part of her brain. Isabella's rational mind offered explanations. A homeless person with a flashlight, a large dog, a trick of light and imagination. But her instincts screamed a single command: run.